Welcome to Marrow Masters Season 12, brought to you by the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link and sponsored by Sanofi. The NBMT Link, established in 1992, strives to help patients, caregivers, and families cope with the psychosocial challenges of bone marrow and stem cell transplant, from diagnosis through survivorship. Season 12 of our show focuses on the important question of, I'm home. Now what? Here's your host, Executive Director of the NBMT Link, Peggy Burkhart.
Hello, everyone. Today we have with us Leila Zengel of New Jersey. Leila is a caregiver to her sweet daughter, Julie, and Leila is going to share her story today and her perspective regarding getting home and getting settled post-transplant from a mom's point of view. Hello, Leila.
Hi, thank you, Peggy. It's good to be here with you today.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to talk to you. Let's start with Julie's story about your family's journey, if you don't mind.
So Julie's story started when she was 10. I have two children. I have Jacob and Julie. Jacob's my son, who's about 2.5 years older than Julie. And Julie was diagnosed with Philadelphia-like ALL in January of 2018 at Goree Children's Hospital in Morristown, New Jersey. We began treatment there. And unfortunately, Julie did not respond well to standard protocols or even to some trials. We needed to transfer her care later that spring to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where she would undergo bone marrow transplant courtesy of her big brother, Jacob, who was her perfectly matched bone marrow donor.
Okay. So, Leila, let's talk about your background, your experiences leading up to being a full-time caregiver to your daughter.
Before Julie was diagnosed, I was working full-time at a local elementary school in the library. I have degrees in education and in school counseling. So I spent a while teaching before parenthood and took some time off once my kids were born. Once Julie was a little older, I was able to return to school in the kids' district and worked a couple of different roles. Had landed happily in the elementary library prior to her diagnosis.
So life was rolling along and things were good. And then all of a sudden,
Right.
You're hit with this bomb.
Right. Took a sick day on the day of her diagnosis and didn't go back.
Well, I know you are an extraordinary caregiver and mom. I'm not surprised to hear that. This season is about getting home and getting settled. So I'm going to dig right in with that. Once the transplant, of course, we know it was successful and you get to go home. Tell us about life then.
We live about 2 hours from Julie's transplant hospital. So Julie actually, she and I rented an apartment in Philly and had to stay just the two of us in town in Philadelphia for about 3 months after her hospital discharge before we actually made it home. There were a lot of things that were really exciting about being home. There were some things that were scary, like being so far from the hospital, and also just some transitions back to what had been normal, what had been home, and discovering some things were a little different once we jumped back in.
A little bit I know about you. You were probably getting organized while you were in your temporary housing, figuring how this was going to work for not just you and Julie, but your whole family, your extended family, how it was going to work with school and all of that. So let's talk about being the caregiver and what you needed post-transplant. You are our one caregiver in this season, so I really want to make sure we cover your needs and how you got home and how you were able to rally the troops and get settled in.
Sure. So I think that since I was and have been caregiver to a child, my situation might be a little different. I was doing the far from home parenting, trying to manage home of my son, who was home with my husband, but also manage Julie while we were in Philly. We were doing the remote school thing in 2018 and 2019, long before it was trendy in COVID, before it was a thing. So Julie actually began with that remote schooling in January of 2018, just after her diagnosis, and then continued that for about a year post-transplant. So what I needed as a caregiver sometimes was very tangible in terms of some support to help us get things done. Julie's precautions were very strict coming out of transplant.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't be indoors in public places with me, which certainly limited the ability to run errands, grab things that we needed. We were shop from home and Instacart users for sure long before. Again, they were super popular in times of COVID. I guess you could say we were ahead of the curve in all of this, right?
I would say so.
Things that I needed to do for myself in that time when we were home, especially because I had a lot of downtime, but not time that could be super productive. Julie was streaming school. I was trying to stay out of her hair. Lots of time to think, which is kind of an adjustment and has its pros and cons, right? What was important was to really find something that was easy, that was accessible, that was within reach. It can be hard to follow the advice that you get to take a weekend away or go get a massage or those sorts of things that really well-intentioned community members want to encourage you to do as your self-care. Sometimes for me, self-care was working on a jigsaw puzzle, jumping into a book. Sometimes it was lying on the couch and watching junky TV while Julie was busy with school things. Things that were not requiring mental or physical energy, and really learning that it's okay to not make every single moment count. Sometimes we really just need some rest and refreshment and downtime, a break from the tasks.
Sure.
A break from making the most of the moment, a break from even thinking. Part of the transition to home when things slow down in some ways is, I think it really starts to hit you what you've just been through. You've done this transplant thing. It's been a frantic pace. It's been a day-to-day. Is my kid going to survive? And when you settle into a bit of a groove and things aren't quite so emergent or critical all the time, the trauma of what you've just walked through hits a little harder.
Okay.
When you stop and think, what did I just go through? So I think it's important to give yourself a little grace. Try to step away from the guilt when you need some time to just lie on the couch and watch that junky TV, right? Or to step away from cleaning or cooking and do a puzzle for yourself for a few minutes. I think that rest and that downtime's not just okay, but really critical to keep from burning out.
Oh, thank you for that. I think it's so important for people to hear that message and live by it, because you are exactly right on that. So can you share some of the top challenges you and your family faced when you were trying to get, as you say, your groove back? It's different for everyone, but what was your experience?
There were a few things that were challenging in the move back home that maybe we hadn't expected. For us, certainly Julie and I had settled into a routine. In Philly, we had gotten comfortable existing, the two of us. We knew our schedule. We knew what we liked. We got that slow start to the morning. We had found which Starbucks around walking distance from us I could watch Julie through the windows while I ran in to grab our mobile orders, right? So she didn't have to come in. I also didn't have to leave her alone on the street. And we could have a slow start to the morning. She was doing school online, but she was skipping the things like homeroom and not participating in gym remotely, some of those sorts of things. So we had a little bit of a more flexible schedule and really enjoyed it. When we came home, my son, my husband, did not have that flexible schedule, had to be out the door for work, for school, had to have lunches packed, right? As much as we were thrilled to be home, and it was great to be all four of us back in the same house under the same roof, it was a bit of a transition, realizing that the boys had really gotten settled into a guy sort of groove that was different from ours. And we had gotten into a girly sort of groove and routine. And to to recognize that and to readjust to being with each other was something that we really hadn't expected. Like I said, it was so great to be back. We were so happy from a medical perspective that it was safe for Julie to come as far away as we were, for her to be with her brother again. They have a great relationship. So to get them back together was amazing. Was nice being in the same house with my husband again.
Imagine that.
Right. So it was so much good. But, we realized sometimes we rubbed each other a little bit the wrong way. We'd gotten used to doing things differently. We'd gotten used to different schedules. We'd gotten used to eating differently, watching different things, doing different things in our free time. So just some adjustments. There were some other surprises medically that I hadn't expected. For example, the first time we rechecked Julie's engraftment, I was thrilled to get the update that she was still 100% Jacob cells. I was shocked to discover that once she was fully engrafted after transplant, that wasn't a guarantee that was always. Somehow in all of the prep and learning beforehand, I didn't realize this was something we were going to be constantly monitoring. That was a bit of a surprise, as something that I thought we had checked off the list and was done, and learned, oh, this is an ongoing thing that we check. Julie had come out of her initial transplant admission, eating well, doing great. I was surprised that some of her recovery was not linear. One of the things that suddenly became hard as a caretaker, I think, was the whole issue of eating, right? She wasn't hungry. We had to put her back on appetite stimulants. Trying to parent and not be constantly pestering and nitpicking. There's things that you want to do with your kid or whoever you're caring for, besides feeling like you're constantly nagging about what they've eaten and what they've had to drink. And it's hard to manage relationship, I think, when you feel like you're the constant nag. And when the one being cared for feels like all you ever do is tell them what to do. And then I think the biggest, hardest surprise for us came about a year after Julie's transplant, when we thought things were going really well and Julie was feeling great. And we were so thankful for that. But we did discover at sort of a routine check with the pulmonary department that Julie had experienced significant loss of lung function. And digging into that a bit was when we discovered, when she was diagnosed with chronic graft versus host disease, which really was definitely the hardest surprise that we had coming home. Julie, as I'd mentioned before, had her perfectly matched sibling donor. When we sat down with the transplant team prior to Julie's transplant, graft versus host was obviously one of the risks that they share with us. It was not one of the ones that her team or we expected would actually impact her, seeing that she was going in with what was thought to be the best possible match. There was some thought, in fact, that Julie might not have enough GVHD, as her transplant team would like, to function as a graft versus leukemia if her conditioning hadn't wiped everything out. So to suddenly be hit with a potentially life-threatening diagnosis as a result of her transplant was absolutely the hardest of the surprises once we got home.
Okay. And is it better today?
I was going to say, I do want to speak, hopefully, a little encouragement that Julie is 4.5 years out now from that graft versus host diagnosis. She continues to feel great, asymptomatic, always, really, which is fantastic. That being said, sometimes her pulmonary function looks good, sometimes not. This will be one of those things that follows her for the rest of her life. We are continually monitoring, adjusting meds. There's obviously been some success in treating her because she is here 4.5 years later, back in school full time, back in the marching band, marching around a football field, playing a saxophone, things that you wouldn't assume a significantly lung damaged teenager would be able to do. So she has had all things considered, fairly positive outcome of this diagnosis, but it does feel like one more thing to manage and one of the scary, harder things than some others.
Sure, it is. It's tough stuff. And I'm so happy to hear she's doing better and to think she's playing a saxophone.
Right.
That's pretty incredible. That says a lot.
Right.
So, Leila, let's talk about, it's been a few years now. What is important to you now? You guys are obviously just living a regular life now, I hope. But the transition period, were there things that you did that helped to get back to normal?
We did what we could to maintain relationships that the kids wanted to maintain. And sometimes that didn't look like the same sorts of social events that we used to participate in. So we got a little creative. Again, in this post-COVID world, folks are probably really familiar with the sorts of things that we started doing to maintain precautions, a lot more outdoor gatherings than we had used before. With permission from her transplant and pulmonary team, we would sometimes pull out the fire pit when it got colder to extend that outdoor season. A lot more FaceTime, things that, like I said, have sort of become normal in this world. We were able to utilize prior to stay in touch with folks and help the kids not feel quite so isolated. We tried really hard to keep Julie on a normal schedule. Even though she was doing school remotely, I didn't get in the way of that. We had a place set up for her in the house where she would go do her own thing. I wasn't sitting over her shoulder watching, let her be a kid as much as possible without mom always there.
Yes.
The holidays started looking a little bit different. We started some new traditions. We're not allowed to have a real Christmas tree, Julie's first winter home from transplant. She was determined that she did not want a store-bought fake tree. She was going to make something instead. And this was one of those parenting moments, right, where I could have, I suppose, not supported or encouraged that or groaned about what that might involve. That ended up being an amazing project she did with her dad. She collected all sorts of cardboard boxes, built this gorgeous, very unique cardboard tree with a lot of green duct tape and spray paint. And it ended up being our Christmas tree for several years. It was so unique. It looked so good. It turned out so much better than I ever would have imagined. We were actually just now, 2018 to 2023, we're just having the conversation. Do we think the tree is going to survive one more assembly? It may have run its course. I'm not sure we can put it together this year, but that became a new tradition. We were grateful around Thanksgiving time. We couldn't do the large family gatherings that we used to do. We didn't travel and see all the family and friends over Thanksgiving, but we did have an aunt share the top secret family recipe for her stuffing.
Oh.
Only sent to Julie, nobody else.
Really?
But Julie's now in charge. And again, that's a tradition that has continued. Julie has been doing stuffing for the last 5 Thanksgivings now, since we have not been able to travel to the host family that usually made the awesome stuffing. We've sometimes traveled to smaller gatherings and she still makes it and brings it. So,
I might have to ask for that recipe.
You'll have to ask Julie. I have not been given permission to see it yet. Family secret.
Okay. I'm very intrigued by this.
Yeah. So I think it's been helpful to take the perspective that we get to do these holidays together, right?
Sure.
Prior to Julie's diagnosis, a Thanksgiving of 4, I'm sure would have sounded like the most depressing thing in the world to me. Thanksgiving of 4 after her diagnosis was the thing we were most thankful for, right? That we get to still do this with her. And we have absolutely come to appreciate the small gatherings, right? That we get to still do these, even if they don't look exactly the way that we thought they would.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So moving on, Leila, one thing I was real curious about was managing the healthcare team, getting back home, and any tips on the best way to approach that, even while you're still maybe at the hospital, just for a successful outcome where if you need them, you can grab them. Any advice there?
Sure. We were so grateful, so fortunate to have a team that fully supports my no Googling rule. That's something I've been really strict about. Since Julie's case, it has been so unusual. It's hard to understand what's relevant and what's not. I find the internet is not a good source of answers. So I appreciate that our team has been willing to answer anything and everything, even simple things that maybe I could Google without freaking myself out. So we've had great communication from the time that we met, and that has continued even today. There's a lot of things that feel scary about bringing home a kid from transplant and being fully responsible for their care and ultimately what feels like their survival. So it was sometimes really important for me to remind myself that our team was trustworthy. They had gotten her to where they would be and that they wouldn't be sending her home unless they thought it was safe and appropriate for her to do. And I sometimes still remind myself that, right? When I'm sending her to a big public high school in sixth season, like Julie's doctors say this is okay. Like they have done right. They have kept her alive. They're invested in her, obviously not in the same way that a parent is, but she's very special to them as well. They wouldn't be sending her out if it wasn't good. And so like I said, that's something I needed to remind myself of frequently when we first came home, but even still several years out. Need to remember that they're advising in ways that are what's best for her. And again, I'm in a pediatric situation. So I think sometimes relationships where doctors may be different when we're talking about children versus adults. But I would encourage folks not to hesitate to reach out at any time when you have questions. That's really what we found that they're there for. Nobody has gotten tired of us or resented us. Your medical team is there to support you and make sure that your loved one is getting the care that they need. So ask the questions, ask for the supports and the resources that you need. Sometimes those are medical things. Sometimes they are others, educational or social supports, but always ask the questions.
Great. No, that's so important. And to trust the team. You know, people really need to consider that and know the best way to get in touch with them and know that they want you, like you're saying, they want you to succeed. So let's talk for a minute about boundaries. And I think we've covered a little bit of this, but I know that you are a mom extraordinaire. You're one of my favorite moms out there. And how did you handle some of the boundaries that you had to set?
Sure. So I was a germaphobe, overprotective mom even before Julie's diagnosis. So you can imagine what a cancer diagnosis and then transplant after that even does to that. We had to just become comfortable with setting really clear boundaries with our loved ones. We absolutely had the support of our medical team to make them the bad guy if we needed to. But it also, it was true. Our doctors don't want them around sick folks any more than we do, right? Especially in Julie's first year as her immune system was regrowing, right? As it was recovering from transplant. Her medical team did have pretty strict guidelines on who she could see. And not only did those visitors have to be healthy, they had some vaccination requirements for them as well. So I used the avenues that we had available to us, like some folks use Caring Bridge, we used Helping Hands. I actually put up a post about that we adore our friends and family. We love seeing them. We're not passing judgment on what they decide to do or not do. And we ask that they understand that, especially in this first year. We have to prioritize Julie's health and trust her team. And this is what they say we need to do. So yeah, we got very comfortable saying that. We did have some friends that would say, well, I guess we'll see you in a year. And we had others that, told us maybe they'd gotten the flu shot for the first time ever because they wanted to be available to support us. And that was something Julie's team wanted folks to have. We had a whole different range of responses to that. Like I said, no judgment. As we're doing what we think is best for our family, they need to do what they think is best for theirs. We did ask that nobody drop in as visitors without being announced, just because you never know what the day is going to look like, right? Some days you're up for it. Some days you're not. Sometimes we're not even in town if we're traveling to Philly for follow-up appointments. I did realize that we needed to remind folks that when we talk about healthy visitors, it was valuable to remind them that their household also needs to be healthy. If Julie wants to have a friend over and the friend is well, but everybody else in the house has got a fever and whatever else going on, then that's not an appropriate time to visit. So
Sure. Understandable.
that was a reminder sometimes that we needed to offer.
Yeah. So we talk about focusing on the most important things. What did you find to be the most important thing to focus on?
I think the things that we need to let go of focus on, I know I'm answering this a little bit backwards.
That's okay.
The things that are out of our control, I think, are the ones that we need to try to stop focusing on. If there's nothing we can do about them, we shouldn't focus all of our energy on them. Generally, those things that we can't control are the things that are hard and stressful and scary. And so focusing and fixating on those wears us down and hopefully most often for things that never even come to be. We joke a little bit that this is a gift that we never wanted, but the reality is that we do have this gift of perspective that we probably would not have had without Julie's diagnosis, right? And we have gratitude for little things that don't seem so little anymore. Getting to send both my kids to school together is a huge deal, right? Listening to Julie's sing from the backseat of the car when we're driving somewhere, huge deal, such a gift, right? Or just having their friends over out on the patio, making s'mores around that fire pit, such a gift. To think about perspective that we get to do these things rather than that we have to do these things, whether that have to be changing our plans or taking care, but that we get to have Julie around to take care of her. We get to sit in a doctor's office at least once a month and talk about what next steps are. The alternative is something, we don't want to go there.
Sure.
It is a gift to be able to get to do some of these things, even when they're hard. A fellow cancer mom friend told me, probably heading into Julie's first holidays after diagnosis, when I was feeling all the pressure to do all the things to make it the best holiday season ever. Like, is it going to be good enough? Like, am I making the most of it? All the what ifs, right? And it's easier said than done, but she was so wise in telling me that if the worst really does happen, we're going to have all the time in the world to be sad, to cry, to be stressed out. And so I think that in doing that, we give ourselves permission to acknowledge that there may be times that we need to cry and there may be hard things, but to not waste the moments that we have and to live in them as much as possible and not in fear and to savor what we have. And I think that gives us some freedom.
Absolutely.
To know that there might be hard things ahead and that there may be times, it's not necessarily that we're saying it's never okay to cry or it's never okay to be upset or it's never okay to worry, but now is not the time for it, right? Like maybe putting it in a box for later when we need it.
Yep.
But now is not the time. So that's a process, that learning to live in the now and be grateful for the now and not get ahead of yourself worrying about what it is.
I love that.
Gets easier in time.
Yes. And I think we can all live by that. It's just great advice. So as we wrap things up here, Leila, is there any last pearls of wisdom as we end this wonderful episode?
The live in the now. Don't try to fix everything. Don't always be looking ahead, making things better. This is a season that we're in, right? So I think to stay a little nearsighted and focused without getting too far ahead, right? Some of those self-care things, like just, reading the book, doing the puzzle, turning on your favorite song, playing it on repeat for an hour if that's what you need to do, right? And I think important to find some community that gets it, that sits in that space with you. I know that's been a huge portion of what makes this feel sometimes manageable or understood, or is knowing that I'm not alone in this. There are others out there that get it. So I would say maybe best nugget for a caregiver is to find some community that gets you so that you're not in this alone.
Sure. And there are so many great resources. If you have one or two that you might want to share, we could put them in the show notes.
Yeah, I would love to do that. So the one that comes to mind is probably the first one that I got connected with, and full disclosure that I now work with, is Momcology. We are peer-to-peer support for pediatric cancer caregivers.
Oh, great.
That was the first opportunity that I got plugged in with to connect with other, mostly moms. We have some dads. A lot of our partners also have programming for parents, which are other hospitals across the nation have support options in place for connecting with peers that are not organization specific.
Leila will have some other resources that we can tap into, and we'll be sure to include those in the show notes. We're going to wrap things up, and thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm curious if the box Christmas tree is going to make it this year.
Me too. I will keep you posted.
And if Julie will part with that recipe, I would be very thankful, as I burned the stuffing this year.
Oh, no.
It was my only mistake on Thanksgiving Day, so I'm a little sensitive about this right now.
Oh, that one we can't post in the show notes. I promise I'll get you some resources, but the stuffing will not be among them.
Okay.
But maybe just with you.
All right. Sounds good. Well, Leila, thank you again for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And thank you to the Bone Marrow Transplant Link for this opportunity. I hope that there's something that's come up today that's been helpful to someone who's listening. Thank you.
This has been the Marrow Masters podcast. If you know someone who would benefit from the information in our show, please share this episode with them. And don't miss future episodes of our show. Follow Marrow Masters for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening right now. And to connect with the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link, visit nbmtlink.org or tap the link in our show notes.